Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program, where last episode we did a refuel of our tanker in Kerbal orbit. And now, of course, we need to bring one of them back. The question is, do we have enough fuel currently? And I suspect the answer to that to be yes. Now, I want to check our current amount of monoprop. So let's take a quick look here. This monoprop is reasonable. This one is full. Okay. So that seems fine. Between the monoprop and the fuel, we should definitely have enough. So we want to be bringing this Starship tanker back home, and we want to recover it, ideally. Now, the question is, we only have drogue chutes on here. So, how little fuel can we burn to bring it back? And how much fuel do we have on it? So I want to check the... If we go into here, I want to eject this and check how much delta V we have. This is going to be feeling it out. This Starship, to be clear, may not actually be salvageable. We'll see. So I want to use RCS here, put us in kill rot, and we're just going to back slightly away from the Starship here. That's okay. And now we're going to need to head over to surface velocity minus. We have 300 meters per second here, or about 4 seconds of burn. Okay. So that's just utilizing these header tanks up here, right? So that's this tank and this tank. 4 seconds of burn. Okay, so I'm going to shut down these engines. And we're going to activate these mainsails. That's still giving us 4 seconds of burn. I think this is slightly inaccurate, but we'll see. This may not be enough fuel. We just need to determine how much fuel we're going to need for this. So for the time being, we're going to want to go retrograde here. And I'm going to do this, believe it or not, via RCS. This is going to be a very, very lengthy process because I don't want to burn fuel if we can at all help it here. So I'm going to physics warp as we do this because we're absolutely going to need that. We're also turning a fair amount, it seems. I think it might just be because of our orbit, though. So I think that's reasonably fine. And we want to bring our periapsis down. Now, this is going to take a while, and we'll see how much monoprop it actually requires to do this. This is all a test event here. This Starship may or may not be recovered here. I'm concerned about a couple of things, including how much fuel we have and how much monoprop we have, if our monoprop is even able to bring us down. So the question then would become how much fuel would be required over and above what we have. But we're currently trying to deorbit with monoprop, which is probably not the best way in the world to do this, to be clear. Yeah, I don't think we have enough monoprop. So that is definitely noted. We're probably going to have to burn a little bit of fuel here in order to bring this down. But I want to burn a minimum amount of fuel. We may have to consider this to be part of the header tank, or at least this. But I expect us to run out of fuel, and I expect this to go boom, for the record. So that is reasonably fine. We're just bringing our monoprop down as much as possible. We're going to burn every little ounce of monoprop that we can here. We're down to about 150 periapsis. That's not low enough. So that is understood. We're now down to about 15 monoprop remaining. 10, 5, and that is all of our monoprop burned. Okay, so that brought us down to about 138. So now we're going to have to burn fuel here, which is not ideal. I'm going to target about 40 kilometers here. There we go. And we did burn about 100 meters per second to do that. I have a feeling that we can't land on 3 seconds of burn. Or rather, on 222 meters per second. We will find out, and for the time being, I'm going to warp us forward a bit here, because we're going to need to re-enter the atmosphere. We're also on surface velocity minus, although that doesn't really change anything very much. I meant to be on orbital retrograde, but that's okay. So we're going to head over to surface velocity minus here. We're also going to want to immediately retract our photovoltaic panels and retract our communitron. So we want to do all of that. Let's physics warp here. And again, I do want to add in an additional reaction wheel to this for future models. So that will help this turn. Okay, so we're going to position it right around retrograde here. We are trying to stop this turn. We'll see if we manage it. We may overshoot. Yeah, we are overshooting here. But it's going to come back around. Okay, so we definitely have some problematic aerodynamics here. This is not surprising. This is something that an additional reaction wheel will help significantly with. Okay. So we are going to be bleeding off speed here. Our overall periapsis height is not very high. So we're putting a lot of air between ourselves and the ground, and I'm doing that very deliberately here because I'm trying to figure out what a minimal re-entry profile will end up looking like. Now, I don't like these heat gauges that we're seeing here. The oscillation is actually helping us a little bit in that regard, and we can see that our surface velocity here is slowly decreasing. Our time to periapsis is currently decreasing as well. So that is absolutely noted. But we are definitely trying to aerobrake quite minimally here. Now, I don't want to fire that before we fire our parachutes. So that's fine. And the parachutes are not going to give us enough to not propulsively land. We are going to have to propulsively land here. And that is absolutely understood and absolutely a desirable thing. Looks like we might be coming down over water here, maybe. We've got our tumble under control. That's a good sign. Our speed is still pretty high. The question is, are we going to have to burn in order to get slow enough to deploy our chutes? And the answer to that is a definite maybe. We're about 30 kilometers up right now, though. There's a lot of air still between us and the ground. We have very little vertical speed at this moment. So that's a good sign. That is a very, very good sign. We're continuing to slow down. We're down to about 2.1 kilometers per second. And we have bled off a lot of our speed, but our heat is definitely not tremendously concerning, but it's a little bit concerning. We are seeing these overheats here. These are our shut-down engines here that have overheats creeping up. Okay. So that, of course, means that this is not going to be recovered. So that was our engines that we were going to burn on that burnt off there. So that indicates that we need additional drag or to come down at a even sharper velocity. Or rather, not a sharper velocity, an even less steep angle. So 40 kilometers might have been too high there. We're still feeling this out. Losing the Starship here is acceptable. It's losing the Super Heavy that is not. So for the moment, that is absolutely okay. We are slowly decreasing our velocity. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough, especially in this attitude, if it's going to be enough for us to deploy our chutes. And that is going to be a very interesting question to ask. We're slowing down very, very slowly here. This is nowhere near as much aerodynamic, or rather as much aerobraking as I'd like to see. That said, it's starting to speed up the slowdown. But our aerodynamics aren't really there. And the fact that we pulled around like this after those engines blew off indicates that that is likely a weight balancing issue. Yeah, I think we're not going to slow down enough there, so we'll have to budget a re-entry burn. It was a close thing, though. If we had remained butt first, I think it would have been okay. So this is going to go boom, and that's acceptable. So with that in mind, we have learned things from this, and that is we need to budget more fuel for sure. That was expected. I did think that that would likely be the case, but I wanted to see what that would end up feeling like. So it calls this a catastrophic failure, but honestly, it's fine. So we're going to head back. That was the tracking station. We probably should have gone to the Space Center. But I guess we can see just how much fuel is currently, I guess, a little bit survived. We'll recover that. That's fine. I want to see how much fuel we have in this guy right now. Okay. I have a weird idea. This is a very weird idea. But what would happen if we had 2 Starship tankers meet up, one refuels the other, and then they stay connected? One acts as a tugboat and pushes the other, using its remaining fuel, out to the moon. And then they refuel. The non-tugboat tanker detaches at the moon, hooks up to the HLS, refuels that, detaches there, hooks back up to the tug tanker, which then puts it back in Kerbal orbit, and then one of them deorbits. That's an interesting idea. I think I want to try that and see what the fuel budget ends up looking like. It would be very interesting, for sure. So let's hop into the VAB here and let's launch ourselves another Starship tanker. So we know that we had a bit of an issue with the re-entry there. I think that issue primarily boils down to simply not having enough fuel to do a re-entry burn. A re-entry burn would have solved the issue entirely. The question becomes, how much fuel does that need? And it's a fair amount, is the answer. So let's open this up. Let's get a Starship tanker going here, and we're definitely going to be recovering the first stage of this. That is incredibly important. That is well over half of the cost of this thing. So let's launch this, although I do want to toss in one... Actually, I'm thinking about doing it... What's the largest size of reaction wheel that we have? So we have the Advanced Reaction Wheel Large, which is... like this size up here. Okay. So we would end up putting that like right there. It would stretch this a little bit, but that'll give us a lot more control authority over this. And I think overall that is incredibly worthwhile. It's worth the extra weight. Okay, so let's save this and let's put that out on the pad. We need to lift off this Starship tanker. That is going to be a very big deal. That, of course, means that the one that we want to deorbit next time, like when we bring down another Starship, which will be after our journey to the moon, the next one that we want to bring down is the one that doesn't have that extra reaction wheel. The reaction wheel is going to help a ton. Okay, so kill rot, throttle up, and off we go. So as before, we're going to go up to... Actually, I think I want it to go a little higher than we did before. Noticing a little bit of wiggling up here. I think it's probably okay for the moment. We may address that in a future flight. But I'm going to target about a 20-kilometer apoapsis, which is higher than we targeted before. We were targeting 15 before. But that'll be reasonably fine. I just want to make sure that this guy is going to get high enough to have a full atmosphere between him and the ground, right? So that'll be okay. And we're going to bring this up to somewhere around 20-kilometer apoapsis. Then we will begin our turn here. And we'll see if we have wiggling up here. If so, that could be a problem. But that's 20. And over we head. Okay. So we're just going to park this guy, of course, right out at that 45-degree marker, and we're going to sit there until it's time to separate. I'm going to keep about 12 seconds of burn time left in the stage here, so that'll separate very soon. 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, and 12. Separating, and off we go. We're going to go to horizontal velocity up with our Starship. And we're just looking to push this guy into a full-on orbit. Now, very little of this fuel will be needed to refuel the remaining Starship tanker, but I kind of want this guy to operate as a tug, and that'll be absolutely fine. We can see our time to apoapsis is currently slowly going down, and that's okay. We can physics warp through this. 90-kilometer apoapsis. We should be targeting, once again, about 150. That's 100. 110, 120, 130, 140. Okay, we've overshot this. That's fine. Engine shut down, and we now need to recover our probe. This is incredibly important that we succeed in recovering this probe financially. So at this point, we are going to do so. Recovering the starship is reasonably important, but this is incredibly important. So we're going to get our air brakes deployed, and we're going to make our way on around here. Excellent. And this is a remote guidance unit, right? Okay, so we're just moving on over. We are in atmosphere right now, so we have some control authority from here. We're going to need to do a re-entry burn, and we're going to retain about... I think we wanted like 7 seconds of burn time for our landing. Somewhere around there. Okay, coming out of physics warp. And we're just letting this come on down. We're going to be doing a re-entry burn fairly soon. This is starting to decrease. I'm going to re-entry burn right now. There we go. Continuing to decelerate here. Preparing for the drogues. Although we're still going a little too fast for them. Okay, drogues out. Commencing some landing burn here. Okay. And there we go. Successful landing once again. It's so much more margin for error with those drogues, but it's also a little bit butt-clenchy every time. I'm not going to lie. So we're going to recover that, and that is, of course, going to be a huge amount of funding returned to us. We had 3 seconds of fuel remaining, so we had a decent amount of fuel margin there. That's a good sign, but that happens in very, very close proximity. The deployment of the chutes is very late. No doubt about it. Every single time I'm thinking, are these chutes going to get out in time? Every time. But it does make it a lot easier regardless. So that is absolutely great. We're going to hop into the tracking station, and now we are going to achieve orbit with our Starship tanker. And of course, we're going to have to achieve a rendezvous as well. The rendezvous should go much more smoothly with the added reaction wheel. So that'll be good. The other Starship is going to turn incredibly slowly. It doesn't have a reaction wheel, and it's nearly full on fuel. So it's much, much heavier. So this first round here is going to be a lot dicier than future rounds when we replace that with a Starship that has a big reaction wheel in it. For now, we can just get ourselves into a circularized orbit, aligned to this node, which we can do super easily with this reaction wheel. Look at that. That is not a bad turn rate at all. I like it. We do need to keep in mind, of course, that our fuel is about half, and I think it's enough to get to the moon and back on just this tug's fuel. Is the ideal scenario, anyway. I don't know about re-entering Kerbal orbit. That's going to be potentially spicy. We'll have to see how fuel ends up working on this. So for the moment, we've got 50 seconds here. We need 40, 30, 20, 10, and 3, 2, 1, 0 mark. Let's achieve orbit. Actually, these engines should be shut down at this point, but it's okay. So orbit has been achieved, and we can shut down our main sails at this point. Perfect. And this guy, of course, doesn't properly update. So that is understood. Next up, we're going to set the other Starship tanker as our target. And we're very close in this orbit, so this is probably going to take a number of orbits to get a reasonable encounter. We're also a little bit off on our ascending node. We may want to do a quick inclination change over here, since we're going to have to do orbits anyway, right? So an inclination change of 1.2 degrees here is reasonably fine. Other direction. 3, 2, 1, and 0. That'll do. We'll align to that node, which of course goes nice and quick with that new reaction wheel, at least in comparison. And we don't have to burn monoprop either. We've not burned any monoprop thus far. This monoprop is being used for docking maneuvers at this point, which saves us a lot of monoprop and potentially a lot of fuel. We'll see how that ends up going. I'm not really expecting to use the monoprop as fuel in the future. It's very slow and it's not very effective. So we'll see how that ends up going. 2 minutes until this burn. Okay, 1 minute. And at this point, 30 seconds, 20, 10, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, mark. Now, this burn is going to be slower than expected, but it's fine. We are in a close enough position for this. Excellent. That's definitely good enough. That puts us at a 0.0 degree inclination. Now we can look at getting ourselves some sort of rendezvous, which of course is going to require a number of orbits. The question is how many? We overshot our target height here by a fair amount, and it's going to be a fair number of orbits. Okay, so something along the lines of that, most likely. Maybe one more? Nope. One less. And it would be right about here or so. So that's 7.4 kilometers out. We can probably dial that in a little bit, but I don't think we need to. Yeah, we can definitely dial it in a little bit. About like that. 4.2 kilometers. We can do a corrective burn from there. Okay. So this will be absolutely fine. Let's get into position here. There we go. And this is, of course, going to be quite a number of orbits, but we can warp right on through that. No worries at all. That battery bank is so awkward. Okay, let's warp on. Oh, that's very flickery. Okay, I apologize for that. And we are, of course, going to warp forward a little further. 40 seconds, 30, 20, 10, and 3, 2, 1, 0, mark. What? We don't have probe control. Oh, I didn't extend our photovoltaic panels. I'm real dumb. Well, we are in orbit. There is a way around this if we could get that Clampatron opened. I can't believe I forgot this. Okay. We could send up a servicing mission. That is an option. We could also relaunch this. We could rendezvous with our other tanker. But that wouldn't do anything because specifically this shielded docking port is closed, and that would be problematic anyway. So I think what we need to do, this is entirely my own fault. We're going to head into the Space Center. I'm going to create a tiny, tiny little rescue craft. We need very little here. Very, very little. So this is going to be a extraordinarily small rocket. All we need on it is a grab arm and a solar panel. That's literally all we need. And the ability to, of course, maneuver to that rocket. So let's make that really, really fast here. This is just going to be a teeny tiny rescue craft. And it's going to be very cheap as well. So I'm really not too concerned about that. So as far as the rescue craft itself goes, we're going to use a small remote guidance unit, maybe even an extra small. And then on top of that, we're going to have a coupling. We're going to have a advanced grabbing unit junior. And then below that, I'm going to put in an RCS tank. Very small one. And then I'm going to put in 4 RCS thruster blocks, but I'm expecting these to be massively overpowered. So I'm going to thrust limit these down to like 1% to start with, and we'll see if that's indeed the amount that we want. And then we're going to need, in addition to that, some amount of power, right? So something like 1x6 photovoltaic panels, but that seems way too big. It does seem way too big. But we could maybe cram on 2 of them, about like that, and then move the RCS thruster blocks to be about... Nah, that's way too big. We could have RCS thruster blocks be here, but we know that we're going to have problems with that. What if we then had an RCS thruster block pairing here, though? I don't like that. I do not like that. I want these RCS thruster blocks to be in quad. So we could put it here. We don't need these to be retractable. So we can save a little bit on that. We're not planning on recovering this thing, after all. And it would just be something like this. Okay, then we need a decoupler here. So a very, very tiny decoupler, like a TD06. There we go. I'm going to have an orbital insertion stage here. This is going to need to be like the Oscar C size. And then that's going to have a teeny tiny little engine. Even a Terrier is way too big. So that's going to end up being, I think, a Spark. What is the specific impulse of that? 320 compared to 345. Okay, yeah, that's probably good enough. So that'll be okay. This is, I believe, vacuum optimized, but it doesn't really matter either way. So that is our spacecraft and kind of our second stage. And then we need a first stage to get this thing into orbit. So I'm going to put in a TD06 decoupler here. And then we're going to do I think a size change here. So maybe a fuel tank adapter taking us up to not that size, taking us up to a more standard size, like this size approximately. And that would end up being way too big. Way too big. Starts out right, but ends up being way too big. Okay. We may not have an adapter to go from this size. Actually, we probably do. We probably do. Hang on. Let's just do a search for adapter. That would end up being like an NCS adapter. Yeah. That does have liquid fuel only, no oxidizer. Okay, so I'm sure there's a different adapter here that we could use. That's a Rockamax brand adapter, which is not what we're looking for. This is a Kerbal, definitely not. We may be able to utilize something like this. Actually, this guy's probably what we want. It's a little awkward looking. Really, we might just want to do a fairing, in all honesty. So a payload fairing would probably end up doing the trick. We would end up going with a 1.25 meter fairing like this. And then that fairing would just do something like that. Like so. Then we get a second FLT 100. And then this would be just simply something along the lines of, as far as our engine goes, it would just be a like T45 swivel. 1.5 thrust to weight seems reasonably okay. These guys can be grouped together. Where is this TD06 decoupler? Up there? Yeah, it would be something like this. Okay. So this fairing could be put into here. Although we'd probably get rid of the fairing ourselves earlier. So that seems absolutely fine. Let's put that out on the pad. Although we want to ensure... Well, we might want to have a little bit more power in it, to be honest. So this would be like a Z200 power bank. And then that would allow us to move these photovoltaic panels up, which I would like. So that would end up being something kind of like this. This would be the rescue craft. There we go. We'll save that, put that out on the pad. Let's get that lifted, and we'll get it rendezvoused up in the next episode. I just want to get this thing into orbit this episode and make sure it works. We might have some wiggling up at the top. It might not be the most stable rocket in the world, but we'll see. If there is a wiggling up at the top, we can just put in some struts and call it a day. That shouldn't be a problem. So we're going to go to kill rot, we're going to throttle up, and our very teeny tiny rocket here is going to head on off. Okay. So we're just going to head pretty much straight up here until we reach like a 2-kilometer apoapsis. It doesn't have to be very high. We've got a lot of burn time in this tank here, and this is going to propel us very, very high here. So I'm going to start heading over and getting some amount of horizontal velocity. This is such a tiny rocket. Okay. From here, I'm just going to lock to prograde, probably. Well, actually, we can see our time to apoapsis right now. Yeah, let's just lock it to prograde for at this... Ooh, hang on a moment. That is definitely not ideal. Okay, we're back. So this is fine. I guess we'll just lock it to here. That was exciting. No doubt about that. Yeah, we definitely need some additional apoapsis height. We've got about a minute of burn time left here, but we have burned off a large amount of our fuel. And that tumble did not help us, that's for sure. But it's absolutely fine. This thing is a little too maneuverable, I think, is what that ends up meaning. But I do want to get ourselves a little bit more apoapsis height. We can head on over to about prograde here. I want to be at orbital prograde. We can position it here and just lock to prograde. Okay, I'm targeting a 100-kilometer apoapsis. So this is actually more than enough fuel, which isn't necessarily shocking. We are tumbling once we turn off our engine. That's okay. Not too concerned about that. We are at an absolutely fine apoapsis right now. So we'll just warp our way up, and we'll just let this be for the moment. At this point, we can ditch our fairing. That is no longer necessary. Okay, and we're now in space. We do have a reaction wheel in this thing, so we should get that tumble under control after a pass or two. The other thing we can do, of course, is simply this. There we go. No problem. We'll extend out our solar panels, and we're going to burn prograde here as soon as we reach our apoapsis, which is right about here. We'll add a maneuver there and bring this on over. That is going to be a fair amount of delta V, but that is expected. So right about there, we'll lock to the node. That burn is going to begin in about 40 seconds. No problem. Okay. So our rescue craft is going to be on its way very shortly. We've got more than enough delta V to make this happen. No problem whatsoever. About 5 seconds to our orbital insertion burn. And mark. So off we go here. We're going to get most of the way to orbit on this tank. We'll burn a little tiny bit out of this one. Cool. So we didn't have any major issues there. There were definitely a couple of issues. And off we go. Okay, we overshot this. This thing is very, very potent. 2.85. Wow. Okay. We might actually want to thrust limit this a little bit, but for the time being, we'll just do something like that. Okay, that'll do. So we are here in orbit now. This thing is ready to go meet up and rescue our craft. That was entirely my own fault that we did not extend our solar panels. 100% on me. We'll go rescue that next episode. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings, and a very special thank you to all of the channel members for making this video possible, including ALS Gamer, Shadow Wolf, Kentogan, Ali Lee, Upper Cumberland Gamers, Nick Smarty, Dimitri H, Punching the Microphone, Soccerman12 UK, and all the rest. And of course, you. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click the join button down below the video, and as always, I will see you all next time.